I want to talk to you about having a political opinion. More importantly, what are the effects of having one? How do they affect the world around us? And so, a strong belief in a political opinion breeds violence. People believe in something and are willing to fight for it. Some quick history on political violence. It's been prevalent throughout history, and it was common in the 20th century. The 20th century began with the assassination of President William McKinley in September of 1901. Violence attacks such as bombings and shootings continued throughout the century. Focusing in on the 1950s, McCarthyism, the practice of making accusations of treason without evidence, led to many people being imprisoned, deported, losing their passports, and long-term unemployment. Although there are very few violent attacks over this, there are still devastating effects on those accused. Bruce London and Thomas Robinson believed that when transnational companies abuse low wages, the government stops serving the people. This, they say, is the cause of most political violence. David C. Nice, however, presented the hypothesis that stable, overlapping group affiliations, such as family and church, serve to restrain impulses to engage in violent or disruptive behavior. Where those affiliations are weak or absent, violent impulses are less controlled and therefore more likely to produce actual violence. What he means by this is when people have an unstable life, they become more prone to violence. A second major hypothesis explains political violence as a result of relatively rational political calculations. People resort to violence because they believe that it will help them achieve their policy goals. If a policy requires a violent act to take place in order for it to take hold, those people who support it will be more likely to commit the act. David's third explanation for the occurrence of political violence emphasizes cultural or subcultural orientations at the mass or elite level. Violence may be encouraged by social norms that indicate that it is a relatively acceptable behavior, or by the elites who indicate that its use may be justified in some circumstances, or at least deserves understanding the view of the nature of the particular problem. What he means by this is, if violence becomes normalized or acceptable, it will become more prevalent. So, connecting this to the violence at Donald Trump's political events. CNN, Trump supporters, protesters clash after Chicago rally postponed. New York Times, Donald Trump's rally in Chicago canceled after violent scuffles. The Mirror, Brit accused of Trump's assassination attempt pleads guilty to grabbing police officer's gun. Now, has violence towards Trump become normalized or acceptable? Well, violence at these rallies are still being dubbed protests by the media. CBS, violence as Trump brings immigration rhetoric to the border. Fox, protests turn violent outside New Mexico rally. The Hill, protests turn violent at Trump's New Mexico rally. All of these articles dodge the violence and focus on the protest. The media act as if the violence is not the main topic. So, diving in deeper, CNN did an interview with the man who charged the stage at a Trump rally in Dayton, Ohio.
What were you thinking?
I was thinking that Donald Trump is a bully, and he is nothing more than that. He is somebody who is just saying a lot of bold things. He's making bold claims, but I can see right through that, and I can see that he's truly just a coward, and he's opportunistic, and he's willing to destroy this country for power for himself.
All right, well, that's your motivation. But what were you thinking at that moment? Why did you do what you did?
I was thinking that I could get up on stage and take his podium away from him and take his mic away from him and send a message to all people out in the country who wouldn't consider themselves racist, who wouldn't consider themselves approving of what type of violence Donald Trump is allowing at his rallies, and send them a message that we can be strong, we can find our strength, and we can stand up against Donald Trump and against this new wave he's ushering in of truly just violent white supremacist ideas.
Were you, if you had made it to that stage, were you going to attack him?
No, not at all. There would have been no point. Donald Trump is 6'3", I'm 5'9", maybe. You know, he's a giant man surrounded by thousands of followers, 12 Secret Service, and a former Ohio State offensive lineman. That would have accomplished nothing.
But can you see how people might have perceived that you were?
Of course, and I wasn't expecting there to be as much Secret Service as there was there that day. From what I had sort of seen, there hadn't been that much in a contained area, so I thought my chances of getting up on stage and getting to the podium would have been better. But again, it was more important for me to show that there are people out there who aren't afraid of Donald Trump. He says scary things. He lets his people do scary things. He's threatened Mexico, Islam, you name it, and yet I'm unafraid. And if I can be unafraid enough to go take his podium away from him, then we all can be afraid enough to not let this man walk into the White House.
By calling violent attacks protests and by interviewing those who elevate the ferocity of these attacks, the media has helped to normalize these events in the eyes of the public. If it is normal for these protests to become violent, if it is normal for someone to charge the stage, then there is nothing stopping people from going that far or even farther. The repercussions of the normalization of violence could be catastrophic. New York Times: some Donald Trump voters will warn of revolution if Hillary Clinton wins. In that article, they interviewed Jared Halbrook. He says, people are going to march on the Capitals. They're going to do whatever needs to be done in order to get her out of office. If push comes to shove, Mrs. Clinton has to go by any means necessary. Applying David's third hypothesis to this political season illuminates the violence that lies just below the surface. One can easily see the foundational elements at play relating directly to violence and politics. As it was in the past, so is the present. People will continue to commit violent acts in order to push their own agenda. In conclusion, politics breeds violence.